Welcome to RevUP Awaken, and I'm your host, Mimi. Today's segment continues our discussion with Seph Dietlin, a human potential activator, certified hypnotherapist, angel channel, and energy healer. Seph combines these talents to help you expand and experience your highest potential. You can find him at talktomyangels.com. And now, on with the show.
Until we're not here in this messed up place where we still have to take airplanes to travel to London instead of by teleporting ourselves, as long as we're still in that state, there's still going to be upheaval that takes us up the next level and up the next level and up the next level until we look in the mirror and we don't see our physicalized body looking back at us. And we're like, oh, there I am. Consciousness. That's me.
Wow. Yeah, but I recognize what you're saying, the upheavals, because I've noticed that, over the years, some of the things that I've gone through, and I said, oh, okay, another one's coming. And I start to hold on for dear life, okay, what's going to be brought with this one,
Yeah. And here's where the rubber meets the road on this, which is really a potent place to be. Where the rubber meets the road on this is that we just learn to get tools so that we can navigate through those periods. And we get to a certain place eventually with awareness that it looks like we're watching a movie instead of actually participating fully in the drama itself. And what will happen is that we'll be able to move through them and go, oh, I know what you are, you sneaky little devil. You're right there. You're coming in. You're coming in to bring me a gift. So let's have it. Come on, start talking. But, there is a bit of that. The other night, I had a dream and I woke myself up laughing. And it was very interesting because we have different ways that we can elevate ourselves out of the upheaval or out of that denseness or out of the part of it that we don't like. We can still go through it, but we don't have to suffer. And there were some interesting thoughts, I guess you could say, that had somehow or another infiltrated some bliss and joy that I was experiencing the day before. And it's just about watching stuff that happens in the world that doesn't happen with the light. And it, as a sensitive, I can see that, and it weighs in on me. And especially it's a situation that interacted directly with me. And it was like, oh, wait a minute, I was in bliss. Go away. I don't want you. But it came in, and it needed to, because it was a little bit of a teacher. But I went to sleep that night and going, oh boy, angels, what are we doing here? God, what are we doing here? And of course, they woke me up in the middle of the night laughing. I had the most funny dream, and I woke up from laughing and I felt better. Laughing is a great tool of that, and the energy work that we do with that, because you're talking about I'm doing my shadow work and stuff like that. And it's great that we identify that there is value in facing what we don't want to face. But I always share from the angels that, be careful that we don't create a category that we have to have extra experience, because we may acknowledge that there's stuff that's part of our trauma that we need to take care of. But if we're constantly looking there, we're constantly going to find stuff, and we might not need to spend all that much time there. Right. We also got to spend time in joy and bliss and all of the kind of more expansive aspect of the heart, because that's our true nature, which is that expansion. For some people, it's really hard to feel love. And one of the things the angels say is we don't feel love, we feel the awareness of its presence. It is always present around us. So if we're feeling ooey gooey in our hearts, and somehow or another we've been taught as a kid, you're not supposed to feel that way. The minute it comes in, we're like, oh, resist, can't do that, right? But it's literally just our eyes to see, our ears to hear the presence of God, which is love. And so the angels say, let her rip. Let it be as expansive and ooey gooey and fluffy and fun and vibrant as you want, because the more you do, you just become more aware of the presence of the source, which is connected to us. And that's when we create miracles, because it's when we're in that sort of dense state where we don't let the heart become aware of the presence of love, because it is always there. The only thing that fluctuates is our awareness to its presence.
Yeah, that's what I was always thinking. People would always say, oh, you got to get into your heart. You got to get into your heart. But we are, I mean, I feel that the mere fact that we're alive right now and we're feeling things especially if you're an empath, you feel things too very strongly.
Mhm.
I feel that that's already making you aware of the fact that you are in your heart. And I think it's just when we go into a very dark place that we sort of detach ourselves a little. But as long as you're still feeling something, I feel that you're still there in your heart.
Right. Well,
So,
and the other thing is we have a mind that's for navigating around the human dimension. And so the mind has a sort of a seamless connection to awareness. And you could almost think of it like those sort of tricolored popsicles. Remember when you were a kid and it started off with one flavor and went to another and went to another. And to a certain level, the lower levels of our mind is the one that, really does us in. And then you go up to the lighter levels and the lighter levels, and that's where you're at awareness. So the ultimate state is heart and mind cohesion, which is where we're in our heart and we're feeling good and we're feeling the awareness of the divine around us. And then that signal is what is signaling to the mind, the human mind, what to do and how to do it. And that's the ultimate state that we want to be in. But when we fall out of that connectivity where the two get disconnected, that's where we start to not feel so good, because that good feeling comes from being ultimately aware of the divine around us that's constantly connected.
right. So it's basically when let's say you're in fear of something occurring,
Uh-huh.
you're basically just not aligned with the God source, which would be of that
Yeah.
love energy. But we still have it. It's not like we've totally cut ourselves off of it. I guess I feel like that's what people are thinking. Like,
Yeah, we're never cut off of it.
yeah,
That it's true that we're never cut off from the source.
yeah.
But what fluctuates is our awareness of its presence.
Mm-hmm.
And we are more powerful when we are aware. It's not because we are connected or disconnected. We are more powerful when we are aware. That is true, which leads to the sort of belief that we either go in and out of connectivity, and it's when we're connected that we're aligned or tapped in.
Mm-hmm.
But the distinction here is that we're always connected. Think of it like a telephone line from like the 70s. Every time you picked up the phone, it already had the dial tone, right?
All right.
So we're already connected. It's a matter of whether we're aware of it or not, whether we're using it. So even though we are connected, when we are in a flattened space of fear from the mind, then we don't have access to the power that comes from the source, even though it is connected to us. And that's what we just know from the practice of it. We know that when we're in a flattened state, things just don't happen, right?
Right.
And we know that when we're in an expanded state that we do. And it's interesting what happens when it is, because as I mentioned, about my fresh little story, I was driving across from Kona to the Hilo side of the island of Hawaii. And I was in there and I was in that state. I was listening to some very blissful music and I was making the affirmation, I am powerful, I am powerful, I am powerful. And literally, it was an opportunity to I guess you could say, attempt to find myself immune from those crazy monkey thoughts that were wanting to come in, that were sort of stimulated by something else. And of course, once I got pulled over, I was like, dude, God, where'd you go? You were in the car with me. You decided to vanish. Where were you when that happened?
He had another appointment.
Apparently, yeah. Someone was driving from the Hilo side to the Kona side, needed to not get into an accident. I don't know,
Yeah.
but there is this, kind of like, what would you say? Then the rest of the drive, I couldn't, you can't get that negativity out of it. And the worst thing that a conscious luminary or any of us that are here to help show others how to access their maximum potential, the worst thing that we could ever do is say that when we get into that state that there's something wrong with us or that we're doing something wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
The best thing when you think of authenticity in the way that you're referring to it is that we say, yeah, we get into that state. Now here's what can happen, what we can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledge that it's there. It's literally part of being here. Until we're not here, then we won't have that experience anymore.
Right.
until we're
Right.
not in physical bodies, we will still have those fluctuations of going in and out. When we begin to grow and expand through our awareness, we'll have less of the difficult, like not difficult, but the less of the horrible things that show up and more of the wonderful and miraculous things. But it doesn't mean that that all of a sudden you enter into a completely immune state from having something that you don't want show up, because then it'll be kind of another kind of a teacher, and it'll be like, okay, what'd you come to teach me? I really don't like that I have to learn this way, but what are you doing here? Get out. Start talking and leave.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Um, well, it always seems to come down to like accepting yourself and learning how to love ourselves, which is funny that we have to learn that. It should be something that we would recognize and be a part of and be aware of it. But how would you say we can make that more self-realized within ourselves, that
Right.
we know this, we do it automatically,
I love that question, because you mentioned self-love. And one of the things that I learned, because I do a hypnotherapy protocol that is about actually doing that. And one of the things that the angels taught me that I have experimented with and completely works is actually understanding the difference between the two people that we are. In much the same way that we're the two minds, each of those two minds are part of a divided self. One is the human self, that is the shell that consciousness resides in, which is the infinite self. Well, the infinite self always loves itself. The infinite self of us always loves itself, which is why when we're taken out of our mind and something happens where we're in our heart, it's an instant connectivity. It wasn't that it wasn't there. It's just that we've returned back. And guess what? As usual, it's still eternally connected. So what's powerful for us is when we allow ourselves to receive the infinite love from our higher infinite self. And it's not the one that's in the mirror that does the giving of the love. It's the one that's in the mirror that does the receiving of the love. And the one that looks in the mirror that is the receiver of the love also has a mind that has a wonderfully distorted filter, which decides when and when it's not worthy of that love from the higher self. And so the way or that we can circumvent that, or to really access that power within more often, is to understand that there's two versions of ourselves, and understand which one is the giver and which one is the receiver. And if we actually set it up and allow the part of us that's the receiver to open up to receive, the part of us that's the giver is already there knocking on the door, waiting to give. And so then this flow happens. And I like to think of it like the aqueduct in California. There's lots of things we can say about the aqueduct, but in this particular comparison, we're talking about a canal of water that goes from Northern California to Southern California, and it is the source of water. Southern California is a desert, in case you hadn't heard.
Yeah,
And the only
I don't know LA that much. So.
Right. Well, Southern California is a desert. It hardly ever rains there. And all of the flower that makes all the palm trees grow, which aren't native to Southern California, all of that comes from Northern California. It all comes from Northern California, Washington State, or whatever. Anyways, there's this flow of love, water, that comes from Northern California and places where it rains a lot. And it flows down an aqueduct. So that's like the flow from our higher self to our human self. And when that gets cut off with fear, when it gets cut off with fear of deservingness, which is, not validating ourselves, which means not feeling worthy, then all of a sudden it's like throwing a bunch of trash in the aqueduct, and suddenly water cannot flow to Southern California and the palm trees die. And that is what happens because we thrive when that aqueduct is clear. Let's say we thrive when that aqueduct is clear, when we're constantly receiving love from the higher self. And especially those who are empath that are listening to this, you're going to say to yourself, I feel such sharp pain experiencing what's going on in the world around me that I can't receive. And there's ways that we need to actually circumvent what we understand that we feel, which is another conversation, but we have to do something to deal with processing what's coming in from the outer world so we don't let it clog our aqueduct of receiving love from the higher self.
Which is interesting because one of the questions that I did want to ask you is, do you feel like this year in 2023 that it's going to be like a breakout year that sort of makes people realize that the things that they really desire, they can actually have, as opposed to the things that we were restricted from believing that we deserved, to have in our lives?
Yeah. Well, and this is the interesting thing, and since this is evergreen content, we'll note that this is actually May of 2023 right now as we're recording this. One of the things that we're seeing right now that is off the charts is that those that are applying consciousness or their new conscious and expanded or quantum beliefs or paradigms to every area of their life that might be practical, including their financial aspects, their work aspects, their family and relationship, they're finding that the miracles that they're creating in those areas of their lives are off the charts. They're also finding themselves even more immune from the events that are going on in the collective, where they're just watching them and understanding the role that they play and taking humanity up a notch, a shift. Okay. And those that see a separation between where we can apply consciousness, and that's the old religious way, right? And we're not going to have a conversation about religion, but the religious way is that I'm spiritual when I go to church, and then I'm secular when I'm at the bank, right? But if we're actually spiritual at all times, meaning full of love and light, then we charge up the reality. As I remember thinking, that's ridiculous that we separate secular from our spiritual side, because if there was no spiritual side, i.e. God, there would be no physicalized world for the secular to exist in a container of, right? But if there's still that separation or still that dogmatic separation, there's going to be suffering in those areas. And all that is just a call back into alignment. So we are going to see there's potent and very, very fertile energy for creation that's available to us during all of this. And what's interesting, this is worth noting, because even though we're resistant to upheaval, there isn't another time that we are any more supported by the source and our angels with the weirdest ways that things come into alignment is when we're in upheaval. We lose our house and suddenly we know somebody who has a house that needs to be watched, right? I know someone whose house burnt down one day. Turns out someone who's traveling out of town, who's going to be gone for 4 months, needed someone to watch the house. Wasn't that weird how that alignment happens? You see what I'm saying? So even right now, where we're watching this collective upheaval, we couldn't be any more supported by the divine realm in embracing our actual authentic selves. So this is what's truly exciting, is that we're getting the opportunity to access that power. And the power is the power. It has no obstacle. So the increase in obstacles is just where the power is not being applied. So we're going to start to notice that areas where the power is not being applied, and I mean the power meaning the power of the light, where it's not being applied, such as in the secular realms, like think of banking, government, things like that, which lack light altogether in consciousness. You're going to find those structures are collapsing, but that doesn't mean that the world is collapsing or that the humanity or human civilization is collapsing. It means those structures are collapsing, and they're collapsing because they lack consciousness. And instead, humans are being filled with more consciousness to create better ideas to take the place from where those were. So it is going to be it is an interesting shift already, and we're going to watch that increase as those that are connected to the light, and that's you, the listener. It doesn't matter how connected you think you are, how good you think you are at it, or You haven't given up sugar yet or coffee or whatever. It doesn't matter. If you're listening to this program and your intent is to continue to infuse your entire life with consciousness and bring God, the creator, into your life, it doesn't matter where you think you are in this stage of the journey. You are going to be given this, this way of passage through this time period.
It's just like the people being brought out of Egypt long ago. You know, they were given help to get out of there. You know, where they were being enslaved.
Good analogy, and it's more than an analogy. That's exactly what took place then. That's how the hand of God gets into this reality and helps when it needs to.
Really,
there's sometimes when the hand of God isn't helpful, when it's a matter of self-discovery or revelation, but there's a time when it is helpful. So we see it when it's necessary, and we don't see it when there's an opportunity where it's missing.
And, you know, for those who, you know, are feeling, you know, lonely, isolated, abandoned, and you know, and nowadays there are many people feeling that way. I mean, what would you say to them to help them through this time period? Because a lot of people are experiencing that. They feel estranged from everybody, you know.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I know is that the minute, or there's a time period, I'm going to call it a minute, but just before we receive something amazing, we start to notice its absence. So those that are feeling isolated right now, you've actually been isolated for a little while. But what that means is that you're about to be connected with your circle. And the only reason you've noticed that missing aspect is because your soul agreement or your higher self knows it's about to come in. So in order to create a magnetic quality between you and the thing that's coming in, suddenly you have a thirst or desire for something that's not there. We commonly think that when we have a desire for something, that we put ourselves into action to satisfy that desire. I'm hungry, I go to the fridge.
Right. Yeah.
Hopefully not McDonald's.
Right.
Right. So we think of the chain reaction, or we think of time rolling out linearly in that way. I want something, I put action into place, and then I get it. And then we think, I want something, I put action to place, and I don't get it. So then we think, well, every time I want something, I'm either going to get it or not get it. And I get frustrated at the times that I don't get it, right? But what happens is that we alleviate resistance when we decide that we realize that the desire for something is the actual predecessor of the thing that we desire arriving. And the desire is strictly connected to what's coming up. Can we desire something and cancel it out through our fear or our doubt? Yes, we can, which is where we have the situations that we can draw on and say, well, but wait, you know, when I was in the third grade, you know, I asked Santa Claus for the Texaco gas station and it just didn't come, you know what I mean? Whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, the desire is attached in time. And just a hint, time doesn't move forward and backward like we think it does. It's all one moment. So the minute you get the desire for more unity with others of like mind, before you get the desire for while you get the desire for resources to do something that you want to do, like create a film or open up a healing center or something like that, the desire is actually connected to the event being on the timeline, because there is no future. That timeline is happening right now. And so the desire is us sensing the presence of that event having already happened. And if we actually embrace a paradigm that we can see it that way, we're going to start manifesting more, because we'll understand. So for those that are feeling isolated or feeling like you really want to be more connected to like minds, just know that it is already on the timeline, and the desire for it, however deep that hunger may be, is absolutely the presence of that unfolding right now.
There are certain incidences where some people, because of an agreement that they made, they would remain in that, or let's say, remain in that condition or a situation based on the fact that they made that agreement. I mean, would you say that, we can change that if we wanted to? We don't have to accept it.
Yeah, I mean, remember, one of the things we have to remember is that we don't see the outcome of everything, right?
Yeah.
And so there's certainly things that we can change. Yes, there is a bit of that, but here's how that goes. I found myself having recently manifested a place to live by miracle. And when I got there, it looked like it was different than what I really wanted. So I was like, angels, this is great. God, this is great. This miracle that you unfolded for me, but I asked for something better than this, right? Well, it turned out that I didn't know I wasn't even going to be staying there. And it turns out that this particular house that I manifested had storage in it. So even though somebody else owned it and I rented the downstairs of it, and had this beautiful space, it was an amazing space. It turned out that there was storage in it. So when I needed to start to become more nomadic with my work, it had storage where I didn't have to move my stuff on moving day. I literally just put it in the storage area. And it was perfect because the person that I rented from was willing to pivot into a relationship where I wasn't a renter of the space, but a renter of the storage area. I didn't see that coming. So that's an incident where that's meant to sort of display that everything that we see isn't completely what's there. And so, in much that same way, the universe wouldn't let me cancel that out at the moment that I can't see it for what it really is. What would happen is that if there's something good that's attached to it, we may get stuck with it until it reveals the blessing that's connected to it. But we're not here to suffer. And that's what's interesting, is that some of that is unnecessary. And it comes from actually overdosing from the mind and the fear. Okay.
Yeah.
And you got to remember that the role that television plays in movies is that it actually gets people addicted to fear. It's addicting.
Yes.
And I can't explain the addiction, but only that it's there. And that's why people who over worry, and I know that my mom was that and I inherited that. So I've been that. So I'm speaking from that, not me versus another person. But that was one of the things that went away when I started working with consciousness. The worry's still there, but not to the level that it was, where it was real panic and anxiety, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what's different, is that it's all about the interpretation of what's happening. And weirdly, when I had that house situation, something occurred to me when I asked the angels, or when I put it out there. They said, why don't you understand that things that you don't see as part of the plan are actually part of the plan, and accept them as such? And I decided to do that blindly in the case. And then the minute I did, I loved the place. And it happened to be during the summer when there were these beautiful thunderstorms that would happen at night. And it was just such an enchanting space to be, that suddenly I wasn't in the resistance of feeling I could have been in a better space. I loved the space that I was in, and I started sleeping better. So there is a pivot for seeing things for what they are. There is that. There also is, yes, ways that we can shift agreements. But we definitely, if there's a blessing that's attached, then we don't cancel out the blessing as well.
Interesting. So I had one last question I want to ask you. What would be the biggest wish that the angels have for us while we're here at this time and going through the upheavals that are occurring right now?
The biggest wish they have is for us to know that all of this has a plan that's connected to it. And there's no place in the plan where you will experience the worst case scenario that you're afraid of. Whether that is total totalitarian reality that is not coming, okay? Or whether it's some form of lack or scarcity that is also not coming to you. All of this is just a catalyst to get the entire collective back into being connected to the source. And it's doing that beautifully. Sometimes a little bit more clunky, but definitely beautifully. And that's the only purpose for these difficult times, is it is a catalyst to cause this reconnection and this journey back to identifying with the authentic self. And as long as you are satisfying that, there is no reality that's going to swallow you up. And they're there to constantly keep us in the flow of love and all of those other miracles so that we understand that.
Wonderful. It's a nice thing to close on. And I wanted to leave the viewers with something that would help them at this time because of everything that's going on. So, yeah.
That's exactly the reason I do this work.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a successful real estate agent. It's like when I got called out of this, I was doing well, and they're like, oh no, you have something else to do. And the satisfaction of knowing that this work, as we all do it, is one way to actually shine the light for others when they need it the most. Trust me, that is the reward in this. That is totally the reward in this, as you know.
Seph left us with many great messages in this 2-part interview. One of them especially hit home, that the desire is us sensing the presence of that event already having happened on the timeline. I thought that was especially quite insightful. You can also get in touch with Seph Dietlin at talktomyangels.com. Visit miriamasilver.com to watch further episodes of RevUP and Awaken. And thank you for watching.